This is a video about the Quad Cities, which are on the Mississippi, half in Iowa, half in Illinois. It's a place I've always wanted to check out, and it's on the same latitude roughly as Des Moines and Chicago, and just about halfway in between. And it's made up of 5 different cities, one more than the name might imply, being quad, but one of the cities has sort of come on and become the 5th out of the 5. So the first city, the biggest city, is Davenport. And when I was growing up as a kid, I always had this association with Davenport with a sofa. My grandmother, my Nana, used to call a sofa a Davenport. And that actually doesn't come from Davenport, Iowa. It comes from a manufacturing company in Massachusetts that's no longer in business, but they were the Davenport Company, and they made sofas. That's what people called them back in the day. Another city that I always had an idea, something that I associated with it, was Rock Island in Illinois. And what I associated with Rock Island was the Rock Island Railroad, the Rock Island Rocket trains. They no longer run to Rock Island, but they made Rock Island, Illinois, famous for a long time. And the next 2 towns, Moline and East Moline, what did I associate with them? The John Deere manufacturing company that makes all the tractors and farm machinery. Very popular, very profitable business. Hopefully it'll stay in business because that's a mainstay of the economy of the whole Quad Cities, but especially Moline and East Moline. And I looked up how did Moline get its name, and it's actually like a takeoff on the French word moulin, which means mill. And supposedly back in time, there were a lot of mills in Moline. So if you want to remember where Moline gets its name, you might think of the Moulin Rouge in Paris. That's the Red Mill. And the last city, Bettendorf, I didn't really have any association with it. I just sort of thought from what I've heard that it was the wealthiest of the towns. And that turns out to be true. It's where the grass is greener. It's where people move, and they've had a lot of growth there. So this is the demographic information I've pulled from Wikipedia, and it shows that the overall area is growing slowly, but it's also having some decreases in population just as of late. So if you look at Davenport, in the 50 years between 1970 and 2020, it grew 3.3%, and it once was over 100,000, then it slipped below, then it got back up over 100,000, and just lately it's been slipping a little bit again, but it's just over 100,000 population, so it's the biggest city of the 5. And then Bettendorf, its next door neighbor, it's had a lot of growth, and 50 years between 1970 and 2020, it's had a 77% growth, and it's a nice area, and it has some nice commercial districts to it too. Then Moline has lost population lately, and it's the bigger of the 3 cities in Illinois. It didn't used to be. Rock Island used to be the biggest of the 3, but now Moline is. And they've had a growth rate of 12% between 1970 and 2020. And lately, the last couple of decades, they've been losing minor amounts, minor percentages. And then East Moline, similar story, has a population of over 20,000, and lately it's lost some population, but its growth rate in the last 50 years is 2.6%. So it's the second slowest growing of the 5 cities. And then Rock Island has lost population. There's just no way around it. They've lost population since the 1960s. And then just in the last 50 years, they've lost 26%. And they continue to lose population since the 2020 census, lost a couple thousand more. So with these 5 cities, it makes up a total population of under 250,000, and the overall growth rate in the last 50 years has been 5.3%. So it's not terrible, but it's not anything earth-shattering either. Drilling down a little bit more, I was looking at the economic statistics, and starting with Davenport, the total income per capita is $18.8 thousand a year. And if you compare that to the national average, it's much lower than the national average, which is $78,000 per person per year. So Davenport has a 15.8% poverty rate, They actually have the highest poverty rate of all the 5 cities. And again, it's higher than the national average of 11.1. And then the median house price in Davenport is $184,000, which is a good deal compared to the national average, which is $412,000. So overall, for all 5 cities, the housing prices are lower than the national average. So for remote workers, this wouldn't be a bad place to check out. If you could work from home, or if you only needed to go into a city once or twice a week, if you could make that trek either to Chicago or Des Moines, you could live here and live well. So going down to Rock Island, their per person income is actually a little higher than Davenport, and their poverty rate's a little lower, and their housing prices are much lower. It's only $151,000 to buy a house, the median house price in Rock Island. And then Moline, their housing prices, and East Moline are both at $150,000. So everywhere in Illinois, it's about the same house price. And when you drive between the 3 cities, it's really hard to tell the difference between the 3 when we drove through. And Moline actually has a higher per person income of $26,700. What's really notable about Moline, a lot due to having John Deere in the city, is that their poverty rate is only 4.5%. That's much lower than the national average. It's lower than all the other cities, including Bettendorf. So people might not be making millions of dollars, but people are working too, and the poverty rate's low, and the housing prices are decent. So Moline warrants a look. Same thing with East Moline, although their poverty rate's a little higher. It's lower than Rock Island and Davenport, but it's also higher than the national average. And then Bettendorf has a much higher per person income, but surprisingly, they have a 7.4% poverty rate. And I read a lot of that is women in their 20s and 30s. It's an interesting statistic. And then their median home value is $384,000, which is still a pretty good deal. So those are the economics going on in the Quad Cities. And the Quad Cities are just half of the overall combined statistical area that is approaching 500,000 if you include other outlying towns on both sides of the river in Iowa and Illinois. So it's a pretty good sized area, and it's a centrally located area. This is from the Quad Cities website. A lot of places like to say that they're the center of it all, but you can make a good case that Quad Cities is a very centrally located place to its advantage, equidistant from a lot of cities. And if you want to talk about how far it is from largest big city, Chicago, it's almost 3 hours driving. That's what it'll take you. You might even think about flying. Why? Because you can't take the train anymore. A passenger train hasn't come to the Quad Cities area in almost 50 years. Since 1978 was the last that the Rock Island Railroad still had passenger service that went to Rock Island. And then in Davenport, it goes back even further to 1970. So it's a long time. And you can see on the map on the left how extensive the Rock Island Railroad's network was, extensively in Iowa, lines all over the place in Iowa. But now in Iowa, most places do not have passenger train service. So they have 4 congressional seats in Iowa. That's what these numbers on the map indicate. And they have one line, the California Zephyr, that goes across the southern part of the state. And those cities are lucky enough to have Amtrak service each way once a day. And there's another line that goes from Chicago down to Texas, and it cuts along the extreme southeastern corner of the state, stops in Fort Madison. So that area has Amtrak service, but all these other major cities, not only the Quad Cities, but Iowa City, home of University of Iowa, Des Moines, Ames, home of Iowa State University, Cedar Rapids, Dubuque, all do not have passenger train service. So point this out in another video I did of the states that do the best and do the least when it comes to having train service. And Iowa is in the bottom rung and really needs to step it up. They have a lot of old, beautiful train stations that could be brought back to life. And they have a lot of places where people should have another alternative to traveling other than just driving. And flying is out of the question for most people. So Iowa has to get more progressive. And then Illinois is the exact opposite. They are one of the biggest states. They're the number 2 state in the country behind California in terms of amount of subsidies that they give to Amtrak so that Amtrak will run train service on various lines. And they come sort of close to the Quad Cities. Train stops in Kewanee and Galesburg, but you'd have to drive a ways to get there. The train also goes to Quincy, which I featured in a previous video, further down the Mississippi. So the one place that Amtrak doesn't really serve is the northwestern part of the state. state, and that would include the Quad Cities. It also doesn't serve other major cities you might think that they would serve, like Rockford and Peoria and Decatur. So there's other cities in the state that also don't receive service, but the Quad Cities, former home of the Rock Island Railroad, you would think they would have train service. It would be good if they did. And wouldn't it be great to have a train like this coming to your metropolitan area? Boy, the Rock Island trains of old, the streamlined, modern look, what a great looking train. So there's always talk about restoring previous lines. There's a group called the High Speed Rail Alliance. I think any speed would do. It doesn't have to be 200 miles an hour, but just restore service along the former Rock Island line that would serve other cities along the way, including Ottawa, which I'm going to feature in the next video I do, and LaSalle, Peru, and then cutting over to Quad Cities, and then someday a line can go down to Peoria too. It's not really on any other line, but get that train over to the Quad Cities and then on to Iowa City and on to Des Moines. Hopefully Iowa would take Illinois' lead and start subsidizing Amtrak trains to have more train service in Iowa. So with that, we went to all 5 cities, some more quickly than others. We stayed overnight in Davenport and stayed in a nice older hotel in the downtown. And the rest of my video is going to be me walking around the downtown and looking for points of interest in the downtown. And I will say also that when we drove through the Illinois cities, one thing I noticed particularly in Rock Island is that they could use their streets being repaved. Some of their streets were really rough that we drove on. It kind of reminded me of Camden, New Jersey, that level of poor quality of streets, and that's not a good comparison. But if the state of Illinois could help Rock Island out, I think that would help a lot in terms of stabilizing Rock Island and stabilizing it so that the population doesn't keep draining away from Rock Island, which has a lot of good things about it, including Augustana College. So that's my 2 cents on that, and let me show you downtown Davenport. I'm going to walk around a little bit of downtown Davenport, Iowa, where we're staying, near the Mississippi River, which is right down the street here. And here's the hotel we're staying at, the Current, Iowa, which I think used to be a bank building. And it's across the street from this beautiful Romanesque building with a huge arch. Petersons and Sons, 1892. That was the peak year for Romanesque architecture. So we arrived yesterday on a Sunday. In August, late August. And now it's Monday morning, so there's more activity. It's pretty quiet here yesterday. And one thing we noticed, couldn't help but notice, was that there were a few homeless people hanging out. Like right here, there was a lady with a shopping cart and a friend. I'm just looking to see what this building might be used for now. Common Court. J.H.C. Petersons and Sons, 1892. Beautiful. So let's walk down here to the Mississippi and walk along the river and see what there is to see. So there's like a obelisk here. And I don't know who's hanging out and laying out on the benches here. But what I'll do is I'll take the skywalk, this modern skywalk. It's really cool. And walk over across the tracks to go onto the Riverwalk on the other side of the street. Shooting into the sun just to give you an orientation. This is in the morning, so I'm headed east. And at this point of the river, the Mississippi flows from east to to west rather than north-south. So let's see here. I had to walk back a ways down this alley, and let's see if I take an elevator up to walk across, how this works. Okay, we take the elevator up. Check it out. Here's looking back into Downtown Davenport, and looks like I'll have the whole thing to myself. So I believe that's a dam across the Mississippi with a lock that the barges go through. One of many dams on the Mississippi. And that's a bridge to Illinois, to Rock Island on the other side. We came in on that yesterday. Yep, water is definitely flowing west, and then it'll make a turn and go south. So we're on the north side of the river, and the Illinois part is on the south side. All right, let's see what's going on when we get down there. I see a barge, tugboat, going up the river. Path there, which the man is taking advantage of. One of the things I read is at the old train station here, the train doesn't stop here anymore, but at the old train station you can rent, or they actually give bikes, loan bikes out for free, which I want to go see. I don't think it opens though until 9 or 10 a.m. so we're going to get on the road fairly early. It's about 8 o'clock in the morning now. Alright, we'll go down now and walk along the river. Before we do that, they have this little open air platform you can stand on to look out at things going on. There's a tugboat with a couple of barges in front of it. And he might be waiting. There's another barge in the lock, so they got to kind of wait their turn. And like, there's a building across the way. It says Modern Woodmen, and I think that's some sort of fraternal organization, and I guess they have their national offices here. So there's just one train track now, and I'll bet you that brick building there is the former train station. We'll see. And they have a little carnival set up there. I don't know if it's always there. Ferris wheel. All right, let's go down and check it out. Elevator's kind of loud, but I trust that it works. And it's doing the job. Okay, now we're down by the river. One thing I was reading is that, you know, the river floods various places, and Davenport has chosen not to build any kind of dike along the river
to contain it. Let's walk over right to the water's edge here. So sometimes their downtown has been inundated with water, like we learned all about in Grand Forks, North Dakota, which had a devastating flood in the late 1990s. It's like that barge is inching forward. It's also going against the current. It's a slow slog for barges going upstream. The mighty Mississippi. But at least the river has to raise up 10-15 feet in order to get over this seawall, river wall. But you can see, I think you can sort of see in this little building here, but it's a better example on this brick building behind. Let me just show you what I'm going to show you. Here's what I'm going to show you. Just at the, you can see the dirt line along the base of the building. That's how high the river has gotten up to fairly recently. And this is their art museum, the Fig or Figgy. I will have to check the pronunciation of that. These are restrooms. It says closed for the season. It's still August, but school is back in session in the Midwest, so we've noticed that things have been quieter than you would think for a weekend in late August when the temperatures are very nice. But I guess it's because school's back in session, so people aren't out vacationing as much. So I know that train station's on the other side of the tracks. Let me just see if I have to go back to the skywalk to go over the tracks. Maybe not. Hopefully not. Take a look at it. And then this is a band shell down here, and they have like a blues fest, I read, and maybe jazz too. They're emphasizing the Mississippi River blues culture that comes up the river from Mississippi through Memphis, big blues center, St. Louis, whose hockey team is the St. Louis Blues, and up to Chicago by way of the Illinois River. All big blues territory. Alright, let's cross over here. Check out this old train station here. Nobody on the bike path right now. It's not like we're in Holland where you have to constantly watch out and don't you dare step in the bike path. It can be like that in New York too. Pretty busy. And I'll just say, it's a good thing. I think Davenport's done some good things here with the art museum and the skywalk, which is pretty cool. Somebody's going over it now. And having the free bikes, because I know when I go to other cities, I look for bike rentals now, or a bike share system. It's a great way to get around and see a city. You can really cover some territory, but feel more up close and personal with it than driving. So this is Union Station. All right, we'll check it out here. So this says the current tenants of the station building include the Mississippi Valley Blues Society and an Ethiopian restaurant. That's something. Built in 1924. And I'll have to look up to see when Amtrak stopped coming here to Davenport. They go to Burlington south of here. But really, Iowa is very lightly served by Amtrak, just along the southern part of the state, east-west, the California Zephyr. And I believe also there's a southwestern train that goes from Chicago down to Texas. It stops at Keokuk, I believe, right in the southeastern corner of Iowa. There's some new apartment construction, condos. Might have just been finished, brand new. And then the old train stations usually had ancillary buildings, and this building down here was a freight house, and now it's called the Freight House Marketplace. So maybe that's where the bike rental place is. I haven't seen any signage about where you can rent a bike for free, but we'll keep looking here. And this says I Love Tofu, a restaurant in this building. Here's a Sicilian pizzeria in this freight building. We're going to be going to Sicily next month, so we always notice anything that has to do with Sicily. Alright, let me read this sign and get more of the lay of the land. I hear a train in the distance. We'll see if it comes up this track. Well, Antonella's is closed on Monday, so no chance of us going here today. Freight House Farmers Market. You know, talking about the weather and how it's still really nice. I mean, it's actually, we're in a heat wave, and today and tomorrow it's supposed to get up in the upper 90s. It's really cool right now. It's in the 70s, upper 90s, all the way up to almost 100 Fahrenheit. So yeah, the leaves are all still on the trees, and it's still very warm. Just the kids are back in school. So it's quieter. So that train horn I'm hearing is across the river on the Illinois side. So this carnival thing, I think, is part of the baseball stadium. They have a minor league baseball team. The Quad Cities River Bandits. I always come up with these crazy names for minor league teams. But anyway, even have a little tiny roller coaster. It's for like families when they come here and the baseball game is no longer interesting to the kids. They have a amusement park to go to while the game is going on. I bet it'd be a pretty cool scene, because it's ballpark looking out over the Mississippi with the bridge right next door. Great location. Once when I was in Louisville, Kentucky, they had a really nice baseball stadium, like a little mini Wrigley Field that looked out over the Ohio River. Great setup, and the stadium was packed. So I hope they get good attendance here Modern Woodman Park. And lots of parking for the baseball games. I wonder if the minor league team season is over already because everybody's going back to school. Meanwhile, the major leagues continue on until October. And the World Series goes all the way to sometimes early November. So I'll take one lap around the marketplace back here. I still have not seen anything about that bike share, but I'll continue looking. This is the kind of building you want to have if you're near the river that can potentially flood, is build it up high on a foundation. But this building must, unless it's watertight, just get some river water running into it when there's a big flood. So I must have misread or something, or maybe the program no longer exists, the free bikes thing, because I don't see any signage about it. Maybe it's a pop-up affair where a truck comes in with a bunch of bikes and they offload them and set up shop for the day and then pack up and leave at the end of the day. Don't know. Or maybe the season is over, even though it's still late August. All right, it's a little bit of downtown Davenport by the river. And out of the sun at Union Station. The train is definitely coming up the Iowa side of the river here. Let me just see if I can catch some of it as it drives by. Coming from the west, headed east. Crossing gates are down. Right by the monument. Looks like a lot of grain cars being moved into position. For the fall harvest. A lot of tanker cars too. And then that's the end of the train. Going underneath the sky bridge here in Davenport. This US Bank building has these chandeliers you can see through the huge windows. I'm sure it's a nice lobby. But like a lot of buildings, I think the upper floors are underutilized. So one famous name in jazz is Bix Beiderbecke, however you pronounce that last name. And there was the man himself. And this is in that Romanesque style building with a huge arch. So our hotel is not the only one in downtown. There's also the DoubleTree here, if it's still operating. And it's across the street from a co-working place, which is up above this parking garage. Is co-working still a thing? I used to see those co-working places pop up all over, like in New York City, but with remote working, I don't know if that's still as big a thing. We're looking up towards East 3rd Street. And there's another freight train in a parallel line further in. So like a lot of river towns, Davenport's also a railroad town, at least for freight trains, which at least add a little life to downtown. Kind of an Art Deco facade for the front door and classical architecture for that building, and then Mississippi Lofts. It looks huge. I don't know what it once was. It says Adler. It used to be the Adler Theater, at least on one end. Nikki Glazer, that's a pretty big name act. That's not until next May. And this is more of one of the main streets, East 3rd Street. Let's see what's going on up here at the next street, 4th Street. There's some shows going on, and probably at the Adler Theater. It doesn't say. DavenportLive.com, Broadway. So they have live entertainment down here. That's cool. And that freight train keeps going east, moving slow. There's the last car, another tank car. The Renwick building. Same train crossing a bridge over 4th Street. Maybe gonna join up with that other line that we saw the other train on. Goes by the river. This is a U.S. Post Office and courthouse. And this is offices for the Quad Cities Symphony. And did they use the Adler Theater too? It looks like a theater right behind us, where you see those stairs coming down for emergency exits, fire exits. Alright, one more building is attracting my eye. It's the building with a clock on the top of a tower. Let's take a look at that. This is a building that looks like they tried to use for adaptive reuse, Executive Square, but the awning's kind of faded and half the sign has fallen off. On Main Street, looking north along Main, walking towards this Romanesque building. Let's see what it is. So this beautiful Romanesque building is the City Hall, it says. And the clock tells the correct time, 10 after 9 in the morning on a Monday. August 26th in 2024. Alright, those are some of the highlights of downtown Davenport, Iowa. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next video. And they have a nice library here too, the Davenport Public Library. Could have been built in the 1970s. There's another new housing project going up. So maybe there's a little growth going on in Davenport. Their growth has been very modest, like 1% or 2% of late. But maybe it'll become a thing here in Davenport, Iowa.